Hey everyone, we are going to start. We have a lot of space up here. Feel free to come up and as you'd like. We have also these blindfolds we've been passing out. Feel free to grab it. Thanks for coming tonight. This is the third event of our Common Ground talk series. And for those of you just jumping into the series, we started this program as a way to bring in participants from seemingly different backgrounds and disciplines operating outside and inside of the arts. And yeah, tonight we have Alan Nakagawa, who is an interdisciplinary artist, primarily working with sound, occasionally incorporating video, sculpture, drawing, paint, performance, and food. He is the host of Visitings, a radio show on DUBLAB radio, and is the co-founder of the now defunct arts collective, Collage Ensemble Inc. And from 1984 to 2011, he was the curator of Ear Meal Webcast. And also with us is Isabelle Harada, is an artist and oral historian. Currently, her work involves maintaining critical theory index, a public database she created that contains assorted theory research available in PDF format for download. And so, without further ado, please welcome our two guests tonight. Thanks for being here.
The blindfolds, by the way, are optional. If you don't want to put them on, you don't need to. We just thought it would be easier to enjoy the sonic thing that we've composed for tonight. And here we go. The challenges of reading aloud in front of an audience, sometimes read like a list, like the things you wrote down and purchased at the market, each item written at a different time. At the moment or near the moment you realized your need to replacement or refurbish to buy again, each item representing time and need and privilege and luxury and inventory. Why, poet, do you recite your work in monotone, as if it were a grocery list, like it doesn't matter? Isn't your written word sacred? You spit words like a bored child at church. You don't get a trophy for memorizing your own poem. Maybe the word should stay on the page. Shouldn't you treat the performance as a separate art form? It has a history too. I know you know that, but you act like I wouldn't notice. But I did.
Archiving is part of curatorial practice. It, like art, is a series of decisions to be made, including what to put in the archive, how to organize and catalog it, how to present it, and how to make it accessible. In the space production theory, you can find a suitable definition for contemporary art. The context is crafted surrounding this material through the experience of its presentation. Next, for understanding information that is contained within an object or an archive as it may be. These networks of information are systems. Every system has an input and an output. An archive's potency is tied to the degree of criticality reached from input to output.
Art Place, 2017. In 2017, I had the honor of being on the selection panel for the Art Place. That included throughout the year several phone meetings, emails, site visits, and finally the selection panel meeting in Brooklyn, New York. Afterwards, I wrote this to our primary contact, Javier Torres, who was amazing to work with. Dear Javier, I knew I would really need to think about the Art Place experience for a few days before I could gather my impressions and reply. Forgive its lateness. I've tried hard to understand the totality of what it was we accomplished. There's probably much I don't comprehend yet. The current of the process and the flood of thoughts, perspectives, and wisdom during the session from that amazing brain trust of individuals was intoxicating. I kept finding myself between being in the moment and stepping outside the moment and marveling at our dynamic. So I started to write this 2 days after the end of our session, while walking through the Transit Museum in Brooklyn, close to your office. I'm sitting in a historic car, one of many lined up both sides of a retired subway platform. It's a BMT D-type triplex car from 1927 that was run on the ABC. Cast iron construction, dark green interior, brick red painted floor, and a kind of rattan cushioned upholstery seating has aged but is well kept. When I enter this, and really any of these trains, the thought that reoccurs is within this historic majesty, what would have been my social status during the heyday of this train? Would I have been allowed to sit in here? To even ride the train? I think of Noguchi, who would have been a child around this time. What was it like being a child of a single white mother in Chicago, half Japanese? The Great Divide was probably an intense experience for him, and yet, much later as an adult, as a professional, he found himself in the company of great minds like Buckminster Fuller and Frank Lloyd Wright and so many more. What was his trajectory to get there? Who was his art place? That brain trust, that panel is an amazing machine, a ritual, a sanctuary, and a university. I'm so glad for your architecture. Thank you so much for inviting me on this council. It was a humbling and inspiring experience.
Selection from Bernard Stiegler's Relational Ecology of the Digital Pharmacon. The discipline tends to constitute a process of transindividuation, which comes to metastabilize the collective rules across which this variability is not eliminated, but finds itself submitted to the conditions of evolution shared by all. It is because memory is always exterior size that psychosocial individuation is possible. That said, we must retain from the Platonic critique of the pharmacon trans-individuation by mastering the development of categorization. In particular, since the formation of Greek logos, what is key here is taking control of meta-categorization, the production of a meta-language as all rational disciplines in our societies, and more generally, all forms of deep attention rest upon these meta-languages. Categories are used as a tool to define the edges of which is being sorted. They make concrete the identities of sets of information or material. In this regard, they serve the function of identification. Sorry for that. The archivist is able to see the objects, ideas, and information as autonomous and of its own selfhood. In this sense, it has an identity that is not contained. It is brought into being over time in relation to others.
As Christina Crosby
States,
such as human interdependency,
that my self-regard
depends on your regard for me. As humans, interpreting materials
of the culture,
its relevance and identity
is contingent on our relation to it.
At UC Irvine, where I went for grad school, one of my instructors was Linda Vallejo, and one day she told me about this art program she was part of and thought I should consider participating. The program was called Arts Region, run by Susan Lyons, and housed at the UCLA Continuing Ed office. They hired artists to teach in the prisons throughout Southern California as part of a curriculum for inmate rehabilitation. For a year and a half, I taught drawing classes at the California Rehabilitation Center for Men in Norco and California Institute for Women in Chino. It was a life-changing experience. I definitely learned as much, if not more, than my students did for me. Who was being rehabilitated? It would turn out to be the first and last time I ever taught, but it was incredible. These experiences were invaluable training for me. In hindsight, I was being conditioned to understand what it meant to work in communities. Using art making as a primary tool, it made me ready for responsibilities of running the nonprofit arts collective, and for 27 years and working as a public art project manager for Metro for 24 and a half. It was conditioning. I was conditioned and empowered to become a civil servant. Of course, this is just a snapshot of my mentors and opportunities. Other organizations that shaped my focus were LACA and the Women's Building and the Social and Public Art Research Center. But it all led to becoming that first creative catalyst artist in resident for LADOT in 2016. The multidisciplinary training I was given gave me tools, and I've been utilizing them. Definitely utilized them for 14 months with LADOT, which was basically the start of this solo art career that I allegedly embarked on.
In the age of new media, the role of the artist, curator, and archivist are heavily overlapped. One can make the argument that even the existence of such a broad category is a testament to the flexibility involved with these roles. While the method of presentation may differ, each practice serves to distill and moderate ideas for the public. In this context, Critical Theory Index has come to function as both a new media art piece and a curatorial practice. The justification as artwork comes from the duality of production and theory. The production side is the coding and the maintenance. The theoretical side is the practice of categorization. While Critical Theory Index has some heavily archival tendencies, I would like to take a moment to pull this apart. Archiving should not be co-opted into artistic practices so easily. There are many other concerns that the archivist has that the artist does not share surrounding the ideas of preservation and restoration. I'm hesitant to call the index of archives in some ways, because there's little concern for these factors when documenting the texts. The question then becomes, what am I distilling? How am I moderating? Who is my public? I distill ideas. We're at all times wading through murky networks of experiential knowledge. The work behind criticality, good Lord, involves a meaningful condensation of life's narratives to gain clarity in the way nodes function and relate to one another. I moderate through a series of choices, inclusion and exclusion, where and when. Publics are born of events, narratives are inferred into the collective perception, then receive back from that point into the individual's conceptual apparatus, a set of possible outcomes resulting from an experiment. Art, the set of materials I have chosen to include in aesthetic presentation, is iterative. Each piece is a thought experiment. Each experiment leads us to an event. Each event generates a public.
I'll be reading in bed and sort of start dreaming, and then the dream melds into what I'm reading, and then as I'm finishing a paragraph, for instance, the dream is confusingly mixed up in what I read, because I'll reread some of it, and none of that I thought was in the paragraph is in the paragraph. Once I had sleep paralysis, where I awoke but couldn't get up, move my limbs or speak. This happened a couple of years ago, and then that week, they mentioned this phenomenon on Radiolab. I thought a spirit or ghost tried to inhabit my body, like in the movies. It was freaky. In recent years, I will drop things. I'm holding with one hand because I tried to grab something else with my other hand, and I start thinking about something completely different. And I have dropped many things lately, but only a few things have actually broke. This is one of the reasons I've been practicing kintsugi lately, a Japanese folk art where you celebrate the breaking of dishware by gluing it back together with gold mixed glue. From when I was little, up until around high school, once in a while, my sight would switch back and forth from what I was looking at in normal view to a close-up, and then back, and then forth, like that. I would have to close my eyes and rest, and then it would go away. Sometimes, if I have a lot of alcohol, my vision gets super clear. Sometimes, in the morning, I would wake up and lay in bed and just start thinking about what I'm thinking is a continuation of what I was dreaming, or I thought I was just thinking, and all of a sudden it's a narrative. And then I realized I must have fallen back to sleep, but it feels like my eyes were open throughout this back and forth between awake and sleep.
I'm distilling an idea. This is an idea I want to remember and share. I want to keep this idea safe. I want an artwork, exhibition, archive to serve this idea. I want to keep the artwork, exhibition, archive preserved. The philosophy and principles of AV archiving includes that the point of preservation is to provide accessibility. Presentation is an artistic, curatorial, archival practice, a practice of decision-making. So what drives these decisions? or more specifically, how do we determine what is accessible? Decisions are driven by intention. Why did we collect these materials we used to create the artwork, archives, exhibition? The materials used to create encapsulated cultural memory. They point to signs that carry much more impact than the materials signify individuals. Everything has a context, a place in time and space. Our perception of where the material is located is subjective to our personal histories. Understanding observations of the individual body as applicable to political bodies and contextualizing them within their framework. These principles have a deeply relevant correlation with national traumas. The impossible and necessary forgetting highlights a political call to disengage from bias and insidious ideologies, while simultaneously dissecting and reevaluating our knowledge of truth versus account, in context of propaganda and recognizing the oppressed body's experience. Accessibility becomes a response to a known lack of objectivity. The process of making embedded information legible becomes integral to a public's ability to understand the context from which the material is being presented. A map or a key to the landscape of presented data. It is easier to meet each other when we have an address.
Number 5. When I was about 5, I stood in the playground. It was a blue sky day in LA. We were in kindergarten in Mrs. Brown's class at Walton Place Elementary School. By myself for a moment, I kept looking up at the sky because I was playing with this multitude of frequencies I was hearing. This was the moment I realized it was not from outside, but from inside my body. I had heard these before, especially right before falling asleep at night or during nap time, but at that moment on the playground, and for the first time, I realized that they were actually inside me. And not only that, but that I could in fact control which pitch was louder, playing it, in a manner of speaking, like an organ. There were 4 to 5 frequencies or pitches, high and low, not much in between. The late Oliver Sacks writes about this ability in his book, Musicophilia. Apparently, we are the only animals who have this ability to focus on a certain sound within a cluster of sounds at will, much like how we can visually zero in on an object or in a person in a crowded room. Dogs can do it with their scent, evidently, but it's not clear if it's will. As I'm typing this, 6:05 a.m., December 27th, 2017, I hear them. It's a quiet morning, and there's no music or radio on yet. There's a low sort of rumble that's at center, if you will, as if it were coming out of my forehead. The higher pitches are also constant, but don't rumble. Rather, they are sustained and coming out of the ear or from the sides of my skull. Right now, there are 3 distinct pitches.
Mediation functions as a cartographic process of the subject's landscape. What is included in the key? What coordinates are working under? What defines the edges of each region?
In a set of possibilities,
It is
tempting to define by negation,
but runs the risk of
denying
denying
values their autonomy.
in unknown territory.
It is tempting to describe
Their surroundings by their differences
from the known. It can be difficult to
ascribe meaning to
decontextualize values.
If we look at a video,
It's a series of photographs. The value of the
moving image risks.
contingency on the stone.
So where do you find
Independent meaning.
what is something to the culture in and of itself? What idea does the collection of material into mediums serve? Evaluation is a means of making sense. Our individual perspective is evaluated by our criticality. Reception is spectral because value within a public is not finite. History projects forward past objects locked in context. Narratives acquire new plot lines that shed insight into the past. A segment from Carriers of the Meaning. Anything and everything that comes under the spell of an environment is either redirected or reformed until it becomes a useful carrier of meaning or is completely neglected. Since every action begins with the production of a perception mark and ends with the impression of an effect mark on the same carrier of meaning, one can speak of a functional cycle which connects the carrier of meaning with the subject.
Mudsling.
Mediation is a manual process of deciding to keep visible. It is dependent on individual judgment and awareness bias. Legibility holds power in describing the ways in which it is effective. It determines what is eligible for discourse. It offers perspective, and in doing so, sets the standard of depth for criticality. We can be critical when we uncover that which we find problematic, but if contradictions are hidden or mediated in such a way to be one-sided, we lose the ability to question and create a dialogue. Collections can be coded through organization. As Brad Stiegler so aptly pointed out, the vision of the pharmacon. Collections are not limited to authors data, but can be extended to any type of noun. An understanding of power and its mechanisms is integral to the discussion of empowerment. The coming together of both affective and infective interactions between people. Power carries an intention not necessarily shared by the individual or collective. Through repetition of action, power is encoded into the everyday and quietly recedes out of visibility as normalized behavior. Power utilizes mechanisms of security as a means of discipline over the individual. The practice of surveillance becomes more panoptic as its effectiveness in the subtle creation and discipline of docile bodies for production and consumption is proven. Outside the body, a state of conscious and permanent visibility is internalized as a subjectification of the individual. The magnitude of the effect, measured as influence, is about the ability to fabricate truths. The negation and validation of discourses intrinsically ties power to knowledge, consequently reducing the free agents of visibility of choice. The acceptance of constraints on intersectional histories by power opens the individual up to manipulation and control. Inherent understanding of individual people, objects, and mechanisms in their own right and in relation to culture is a form of empowerment.
Rescue.
Current ideas of distributed curating tend more toward the shape of networks as described by computing culture, where a curator might be a node and what is described, or might be a node and what is distributed is not just the art, but the process of curating itself. Technologies of attention can be described as both cultural and cognitive technologies, and in what in France is called the science and technology of the digital, the coupling between societies, technologies, bodies, and psychic apparatuses become a common question for most of the disciplines, which concern themselves with all kinds of social agents, from industrialists, judges, political representatives, to doctors, artists, parents, and citizens, etc. We think of knowledge in terms of production, placing ideas themselves under the same constraints as the commodity. Haraway's cyborg order is based on the material reality of a polymorphous information system. Virtually and materially embodied accounts provide for flexible definitions of matters of concern, while Cone holds an open-ended expectation of criticality outside of the symbolic. Emphasis on the body's site as semiosis. Emphasis on the body as a site of semiosis breaks with the metropolitan mode of language to provincial. Cone looks to Pierce's work, understanding the components of signs and signifiers as a guide to study how the non-human signifiers might create meaning outside of our normal means of observation, differentiation, contextualization, and interpretation. In other words, he is searching for a dialogue outside of the logic of our currently constructed pharmacon.
Presented under the rubric
of pleasure, paternalism, and property, power is administered through a seductive rhetoric that narrows possibility and serves to normalize oppression. Increasingly ubiquitous technologies and open-ended laws are forms of discipline as described by Foucault. Through the prescription of identity and normalization of oppressive behavior, contemporary rhetorics of security perpetuate dynamics of visibility so that the capitalist modes appear as functional to those who would change it. Panoptic prisoners have been misdirected to believe the gaze of their neighbors or even a glance in the mirror as the presence of the guard. Shifting landscape of power in contemporary societies calls for a recognition of parameters and commonality as potential constraints. We need to open our scope of possibility. We need to feel like we can play with ideas. We need to be brave in the face of failure. We need to rethink measurements of value and abandon altruism.
Conical Sound, Simon Rodia and Antoni Gaudi.
If one of the faults of the pharmacon is its place outside of time, or rather its instantaneous look at the problematic, then a possible solution is to place this system in time. What are the structures that we are upholding in culture, ideologies, and institutions? When and where do these factors come from? Are they historically relevant now? Will they be historically relevant to the future we are trying to bring? Projecting future desires and interests of a public is one of the overlapping concerns for artists, curators, and archivists. As publics are constantly shifting with the progress of historical events, those who collect to display, and this extends to materials to display as art object, to database entries to maintain as archive, are required to be flexible with methodologies of accessibility and publicity. If it is accessible, people know it is there and where to find it. If it's for a public, a personal link should be created between the collection and the individual. As global capitalist modes of production cycle faster as the individual strives to keep pace in a time it's hard to determine the difference between trend and historical event. We're constantly producing things we're not keeping, and we cannot serve it all. Cultural arbiters, the artist, curator, and archivist, must have a reasoning as to what is kept and why. Who are the stakeholders, users, and constituency that must be consulted to determine what is legible? The pharmacon would say the institution itself. Cone would ask the trees. The arbiter determines their audience and speaks to them. In a way, the practices of art making, curation, and archiving are the creation of small heterotopias. There will never be one way to speak to everyone.
Peace resonance. Hiroshima Wendover.
Last one, you guys. If the public has an interest in the event of engaging with the artwork, exhibition, archive, they change it. Perception is fragile. The observer effect. Artists, curators, institutions, each quantify culture and respond through a practice that necessitates visibility. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it. Our identities build a bridge between disjointed places and times. Tied up in physical bodies and intangible histories whose practices are not necessarily synchronized. The tension between timing is heightened in the experience of identity through electronic media, like frames per second in a video or a scrolling poster instance compressed into both an individual and group narrative. Compression is the effect of dynamic knowledge long lost to those who misunderstood and perverted the mysteries of the universe because they couldn't handle the fact that mystery was just that. And thus had to make the void unknown become concrete static truths to squeeze down every opposition in the name of reason. In fact, the process of compression owns history. It is washed it down to a single event by means of turning it into a recycling bin made out of always material. Authenticity of individual intention is the law we compress ourselves to a public. But the category of public also serves to reciprocally define a form of value that is to that intention. Valuation is a form of making sense of the world that is outside of the finite. It shifts with the historical events to create publics. Value and memory are connected through